the ruthless billionaire who swore never to love again until she broke down his walls. Stay tuned, because today's story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, power, and revenge. But what will happen at the end will surprise you. Welcome back to the channel, Bent Souls friends. I'm thrilled to bring you another gripping story that will have your heart racing. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. Let's stay connected. Today, we have a story filled with emotion, power, and unexpected turns. It's about a man who thought he had everything, yet the one thing he wanted the most, love, was the one thing he couldn't allow himself to have. But everything changed when he met her. Before we jump into it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your country in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far our stories reach. Let me ask you, have you ever met someone who completely changed your view of the world? Someone whose presence shook your entire reality? Well, that's exactly what happened to our billionaire CEO. John Grimes was the kind of man who walked into a room and commanded immediate attention. His presence, like a storm, seemed to bend the air around. As the CEO of Grimes Industries, a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire, he held the world in the palm of his hand. Yet, despite all the wealth, success, and power he had gained, John had something far more precious within his reach that he would never allow himself to have. Love. It wasn't that he didn't deserve love, it was that he couldn't bear it. Love had once been his greatest vulnerability, and it had shattered him. His heart, once open to connection and affection, had become a fortress, cold, impenetrable, and ruthlessly guarded. As a child, John was taught that emotions were weaknesses. His father, a ruthless businessman in his own right, had made sure that John grew up understanding one thing: power was everything. His father's cold indifference to his emotional needs left John with a lingering feeling of being unseen, unimportant. Every lesson he learned, whether through his father's silent disapproval or through the business dealings he witnessed, was always the same: do whatever it takes to win. There was no room for love in that equation. But it wasn't just his father's influence that led him to abandon love. It was the betrayal of his first love, a woman he trusted with his entire heart, that set him on the path to isolation. John's first serious relationship had been with Veronica, a beautiful, intelligent woman who seemed perfect for him. At first, it felt like a dream come true. Veronica was everything he needed: charming, ambitious, and willing to stand beside him as he built his empire. They were inseparable, or so it seemed. John, deeply in love, and wanting to believe in the possibility of happiness, didn't see the signs. Veronica had been playing him. She had been using his love for her as a stepping stone to get closer to his wealth. Her interest in him was never truly about love. It was about securing her place in high society. When John had proposed, he thought he was offering her the world. Little did he know, she was already planning her exit strategy. When the truth finally came out, it hit John like a slap in the face. Veronica had been manipulating him for months, playing the part of the perfect fiancé while secretly scheming to take control of his business assets. She had drained his accounts and left him with nothing but a broken heart and an even more broken sense of trust. The emotional toll of the betrayal was devastating. It wasn't just the financial loss, it was the loss of his ability to trust anyone, especially women. He had opened himself up to her, and she had taken everything he had to offer. The emotional scars from that betrayal were far deeper than anything money could replace. After she left, John swore he would never again allow someone to get close enough to hurt him. His heart would remain locked away, forever. No woman would ever have the power to break him again. From that point forward, John's approach to life became unyielding. He turned his attention to his work, building Grimes Industries into the powerhouse it was known as today. He became known as the ruthless billionaire CEO, who got things done, no matter the cost. Business deals, boardroom politics, even friendships. All were simply tools for him to control the narrative, control the world around him. John's reputation was built on fear. It wasn't just that people respected him, they feared him. He had the kind of power that made people tremble. If someone owed him money, he didn't hesitate to take what was his, even if it meant ruining them. Businesses were swallowed whole, homes were repossessed, and lives were destroyed, all in the name of maintaining control. For John, there was no room for weakness, no room for compromise. He'd seen firsthand how betrayal could ruin everything, and he wasn't about to let anyone close enough to do that again. It wasn't just in his personal life that he displayed this coldness. He treated everyone around him with the same ruthless efficiency. To his employees, he was a shadow, a figure that loomed over their work without offering any real connection. He expected results, and if he didn't get them, there were no second chances. People who owed him money weren't just asked to repay, it was a demand, and if they didn't comply, they lost everything. People's businesses would be taken from them, or their homes would be seized, all because John had no patience for failure. And yet, in the midst of all this, John's life felt increasingly empty. His empire was growing, but there was something hollow inside of him. He was surrounded by wealth and power, but it wasn't enough. Deep down, John knew he had everything he could possibly want, but it was all just an empty shell. Nothing brought him joy anymore. John lived for control, and he was good at it. But the more he controlled, the more he realized that control was the one thing that kept him from feeling anything real. His company had its hands in every industry, real estate, technology, even pharmaceuticals. But at the end of each day, John felt a lingering emptiness that no amount of money or power could fill. What was he truly living for? He had no friends, no real family connections, and no one who loved him. His father was long gone, and Veronica's betrayal had made it impossible for him to trust anyone, let alone let someone close enough to offer genuine affection. Despite his coldness, John had a constant, painful feeling of isolation. He was a man surrounded by people, but no one ever truly saw him, not the way someone who loved him could. And that was the price he had paid for the power he had so fiercely sought. No love, no trust, just control. John's mind often wandered to one place in particular, a place he never wanted to admit to anyone. Was there a way back from this? Could someone break through the walls he'd so carefully built? Could he allow himself to feel something again? He would often push these thoughts away, burying them deeper, but every now and then the question lingered. No one had dared to challenge him in the way he feared the most, until a strange lady came along. At the same time, a woman named Michelle Foster was living in a world that seemed determined to break her, strong-willed, independent, and filled with a fierce determination. Michelle wasn't someone who let failure define her. If anything, she thrived in it. Yet, here she was, her dream of running a creative agency, crumbling under the weight of debts she couldn't repay. Michelle had always believed that perseverance was the key to success. Growing up in a working-class family, she learned early on that nothing came easy. Her parents worked hard to make ends meet, teaching Michelle that effort could move mountains. Armed with that lesson, she set out to create something of her own. She started her graphic design business with nothing but passion, drive, and a vision to succeed. But dreams, no matter how strong, have a way of fading when reality hits. She had worked tirelessly, pushing herself to the limits, but the failures stacked up quicker than the wins. Clients pulled out, money dried up, and soon, Michelle found herself buried in debt with no clear way out. She had no other choice but to approach the one man she had hoped to avoid, the ruthless billionaire, John Grimes. Michelle knew of him, of course, everyone did. Grimes Industries was known worldwide, and so was John Grimes himself, a man of power, control, and a reputation for leaving a trail of destruction behind him. No one crossed John Grimes without paying the price. And now, here she was, standing at the ease of a precipice, forced to turn to him for help. Her heart sank the moment she walked into his office. The towering windows, the cold, sleek furniture, the air that seemed to hum with his authority. It was all so intimidating. But Michelle was too desperate to feel fear. She needed help, and she was going to get it, even if it meant swallowing her pride and negotiating with a man like him. When John Grimes looked at her, she could see the calculation in his eyes. He didn't care about her struggles, her dreams, or her vision. To him, she was just another opportunity to exploit, another person who owed him something. But Michelle wasn't about to roll over. "Miss Grimes," she began, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I need a loan to keep my business alive. I'm asking for a chance to prove myself. If you give me this, I will repay it, on time, every time." John didn't respond immediately, instead studying her with an intensity that felt like it was peeling back her layers. She knew he had seen the financial setbacks, the desperate situation she was in, but it didn't seem to faze him. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice ice cold. "I'm not in the habit of doing favors, Miss Foster, but I'll make you a deal. I'll give you the money you need, but the terms are simple. Pay me back by the agreed deadline, or I take everything, your business, your assets, your future. Understood?" Michelle, though trembling inside, didn't hesitate. "Understood," she said, meeting his cold gaze with defiance. This was it, the last chance she had. If she failed, she would lose everything. The deal was set, the loan was secured. But Michelle quickly learned that getting the money was the easy part. Paying it back was an entirely different challenge. Every day, the pressure mounted. She worked tirelessly, pulling in late nights, taking on more projects than she could handle, trying to juggle 100 things at once. But no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough. Her debt to John Grimes grew heavier with every passing day, and with it, the dread of knowing that if she didn't repay him soon, he would take everything from her. Michelle wasn't one to give up easily. She had built this business from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let it go without a fight. But the more she fought, the more it felt like she was sinking deeper. The stress, the exhaustion, the constant fear of failure. Michelle could barely keep her head above water. But despite all of it, there was a spark of hope that kept her going. That hope was fueled by something she couldn't quite put her finger on, something that had begun to shift in her every time she saw John Grimes. Despite his coldness, despite his ruthless business dealings, there was something human in him. She had seen it in those rare moments when their eyes met, when his guard slipped ever so slightly. She couldn't explain it, but it was enough to make her keep going. As the deadline drew nearer, Michelle could feel the pressure closing in around her like a vice. She worked harder than ever, burning the midnight oil, taking on extra projects to try and scrape together any amount of money she could. Weekends became a blur of emails, phone calls, and endless design work, an attempt to claw her way out of the mountain of debt that threatened to swallow her whole. Each day that passed without a solution felt like a sinking weight pulling her deeper into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She tried to hold on to the hope that something, anything, would come through to save her, but the reality of the situation hit harder every minute. No matter how much effort she put in, it wasn't enough. Her business was in freefall, and she couldn't stop the downward spiral. There was no lifeline, no backup plan, no way to bring in enough income to meet the repayment deadline. She had exhausted every option she could think of, and now, standing on the edge of failure, Michelle felt the terrifying weight of inevitability. It was too late, but the morning of the deadline arrived with a coldness that mirrored the dread that had settled deep in her chest. The sun barely peered through the heavy curtains of her office. Michelle sat at her desk, staring at the blinking cursor on her screen, unable to focus on the reports she'd been drafting. Her mind kept returning to the looming deadline. Time was running out, and there was no escaping it. She had nothing left to offer. Her debts were unmanageable, and every client she thought could help her had fallen through. Her entire world had been consumed by the thought of repaying John Grimes, and now it was slipping away, bit by bit, hour by hour. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't bring herself to type. The weight of the situation crushed her. Every inch of her being screamed to keep fighting, but in her heart, Michelle knew she had no more fight left in her. Her dream was crumbling, and no matter how much she tried to hold it together, it was falling apart. With a deep, shaky breath, she grabbed her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed John Grimes' number. The call connected, and she was immediately greeted by his cold, impersonal voice. "Miss Forster," he said, his tone clipped. "As always, I trust you've made the necessary arrangements." Michelle's heart pounded in her chest. She took another breath, trying to steady herself, trying to make the words come out as professionally as possible. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide the crack in her voice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grimes. I wasn't able to make the payment," she said, her words coming out softer than she had intended. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Michelle's stomach twisted in knots. She could feel the silence pressing against her, suffocating her, making her feel as if the world had stopped spinning. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders. She could almost hear John's mind working, calculating, assessing, preparing his next move. The thought of him taking everything she had worked for, all of her dreams, felt like a physical blow to her chest. "Very well," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "As per our agreement, your company is mine now. I will have the necessary paperwork processed by the end of the day." Michelle felt as though the floor had been ripped out from under her. The words he spoke were cold, final, and they landed with a brutal force. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it real. Her business, her dreams were slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The thought of losing everything she had worked for was unbearable. She had poured so much of herself into this company, every ounce of her energy, her creativity, her soul. To have it all taken away in an instant by the very man who held her future in his hands felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in. Michelle's hands were shaking as she gripped the phone, her knuckles white with tension. "Please, Grimes," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. "You can't just take everything from me. I've worked so hard for this. This is my life, my future." But John's response was swift and unyielding. "Your failure is your own, Miss Foster. You signed the contract, you agreed to the terms, and now, I'm taking what's mine." Michelle's breath caught in her throat. The finality in his voice made it clear that there was no room for negotiation, no way out. It was over. For a moment, she felt her world collapsing, the weight of his words crushing everything she had built. But even as the finality of the situation settled over her, something inside her stirred. A deep, primal part of her refused to give up. She had fought too hard for this. She wasn't going to let him take everything without a fight. "No," Michelle said, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm not going to let you do this. I've worked too hard, and I won't just hand over everything. You may be a billionaire, Mr. Grimes, but that doesn't mean you can control everything." The silence on the other end of the line was thick. Michelle could feel the tension in the air, her pulse racing as she waited for John's response. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, almost mocking. "Miss Foster, you're in no position to bargain. Your failure is your own. You signed the contract, you agreed to the terms, and now, I'm taking what's mine." Michelle's anger flared, rising up from the pit of her stomach. She had nothing left to lose. You think taking my business will fix things? You think it will make you happy, Mr. Grimes? I'm not giving up. I won't be intimidated by you anymore. You may take my company, but you won't break me." For a moment, there was silence again. Michelle's heart hammered in her chest as she waited, unsure of what would happen next. Was this the end of everything? Would John simply ignore her defiance and take everything anyway? But then, John spoke again, his voice quieter now, though still laced with that cold, impenetrable edge. "You have guts, Miss Foster. I'll give you that." It was a rare admission from the man who had never been known to praise anyone. Michelle's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if he was trying to break her spirit, or if this was a sign that there was something more beneath the surface of his icy demeanor. But for the first time she felt like she wasn't just another business transaction to him. She had made him see her, not as a debtor, but as a person. The realization hung in the air between them, an unexpected shift. But John Grimes was not a man who easily changed his mind. Despite her defiance, despite the strength she had shown, the game between them was far from over. In the days following their heated phone call, the stakes grew higher. John, ever the strategist, was not one to take defeat lightly. His reputation for ruthlessness had been earned over years of manipulating and controlling those around him, and Michelle was no exception. As Michelle scrambled to come up with a solution, she could feel John's shadow over her every move. It wasn't enough that she was already struggling to keep her business afloat. Now John's influence began to suffocate her every chance of turning things around. It started subtly at first. One morning, Michelle received an email from one of her largest clients. The subject line read, "Project terminated. Immediate action required." She opened it, and her stomach sank as she read the words, "Due to recent concerns with your business operations, we've decided to terminate our contract. Please take immediate steps to address this issue." Michelle felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just any contract, it was one that would have brought in much-needed revenue. The terms were clear, and the money from the project was supposed to help her pay off part of her debt to John. But now, it was gone. She quickly reached out to her contact at the company, only to receive a cold, impersonal reply. "We were advised by our investors to reassess our partnerships, and Grimes Industries has placed your business on a watch list. The decision is final." Michelle's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her. This was no coincidence. John Grimes was using his power to sabotage her every step. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, emails, and sleepless nights. Michelle tried everything she could think of to salvage what was left. She approached new potential clients, offering discounts, creative solutions, and even extended payment plans, anything to get the business she needed. But with every new attempt, it seemed as though John was always one step ahead, shutting down every opportunity before it could even begin. Another email arrived in her inbox the next morning, this time from one of her investors. She opened it cautiously. The message was direct. "We've received a call from Mr. Grimes himself. We regret to inform you that we will be suspending any further investments in your company." Her stomach twisted into knots. Michelle had worked hard to build relationships with these investors, and now, they were pulling back because of John's interference. He was using his wealth and influence to make sure she had no way out. It wasn't just her clients or investors he was targeting. He had started reaching out to everyone in her network, spreading rumors, putting pressure on anyone associated with her company. He was methodical, ruthless in his pursuit to strip her of every last resource. But Michelle wasn't about to give up. Not now. She couldn't afford to. Late at night, when the rest of the world was asleep, she stayed at her desk, poring over spreadsheets and financial documents, trying to find any way to make the numbers work. She reached out to a smaller lender, hoping they could provide a bridge loan to buy her some time. She made countless phone calls, trying to drum up new business, even though it seemed impossible. Every time she came up with a solution, John found a way to shut it down. Every contract she secured, every potential deal she had, was threatened. It was as though John's hand was everywhere, crushing her efforts at every turn. And yet, despite it all, she refused to back down. Michelle didn't know how she would do it, but she would find a way. She couldn't let her dream die, not because of one man's cold, calculating decisions, but the pressure weighed heavily on her. Every day was a battle. The phone calls from John became more frequent, each one more cutting than the last. "I'll be taking your company soon, Miss Foster," he would say with a smirk in his voice. "And when I do, there won't be anything left." Michelle pushed forward, but she could feel herself breaking. She hadn't slept in days, hadn't eaten properly, and her body was starting to betray her. The stress was overwhelming, and there were times when she felt like she might collapse under the weight of it all. Yet, she refused to let John see her weakness. She had to keep fighting. One late evening, after yet another phone call with John that left her feeling defeated, Michelle found herself staring at the city skyline from her office window. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness inside her mind. She thought about everything she had lost, her confidence, her hope, her business, and everything she stood to lose if she couldn't figure out how to repay John. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed her last remaining investment. The call rang a few times before the voicemail picked up. She was about to hang up, feeling a sense of hopelessness creeping in, when suddenly, there was a knock on her office door. She looked up, startled. To her surprise, it was David, one of her former clients who had been supportive of her work in the past. "Michelle," he said, looking concerned, "I heard what's been going on. We've been talking, and we want to help." Her heart skipped a beat. "You do?" she asked, surprised. David nodded. "We've come up with a plan. It's not much, but it's enough to help you stay afloat and buy some time. You've got something special here, Michelle. Don't let Grimes win." For the first time in what felt like forever, Michelle felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. As she worked through her plan, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting inside her. She had no idea how she would win against John Grimes, but for the first time she felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. John Grimes had always been in control, always the one pulling the strings. But now, as Michelle found new ways to fight back, she saw the first sign of weakness in his composure. There were moments, small fleeting moments, when she saw something other than the ruthless CEO in his eyes, a hint of tenderness, something that seemed to touch his heart. She wasn't sure what it meant, but Michelle was determined to find out. The tension between them was building, and no matter how hard John tried to crush her, she wasn't going to let him have the last word. Michelle's mind raced as she walked away from the office that evening, her chest still tight from the conversation with John. She had fought for her dream, and though she hadn't won, something inside her had shifted. She couldn't allow herself to crumble under his pressure. No matter how many times he tried to crush her spirit, she wasn't going to let it break her. But as Michelle stepped out into the brisk evening air, her thoughts remained clouded. The weight of everything still felt heavy, but for the first time in a while, she allowed herself to breathe. She needed some time to herself, away from the constant stress, away from the battle with John. She found herself wandering into a small, cozy coffee shop, one that she frequented when she needed to clear her mind. It was quiet, warm, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee immediately calmed her nerves. She ordered her usual, black coffee, no sugar, and took a seat by the window. The place was nearly empty, with just a few other patrons scattered around. Michelle pulled out her sketchpad, flipping to a new page. She had a new campaign idea she had been working on, and she needed to focus. It wasn't much, but it was something she could use to fight back, something that might finally give her a chance to turn things around. As she began sketching ideas, she tried to block out the weight of everything else, the debt, the pressure, the looming threat of losing everything. She poured herself into her work, her passion radiating from every line she drew. The world outside faded away as she focused entirely on her craft. This was her escape, her refuge from the storm that had been her life for the past few months. And that's when it happened. The door to the coffee shop opened, and Michelle didn't notice at first. She was too absorbed in her work. But then, she heard the voice. Low, cold, yet oddly familiar. Michelle Foster. She looked up, startled, her eyes widening when she saw him standing there. It was John Grimes. John stood by the counter, looking over at her. His presence was just as commanding in the small coffee shop as it was in his corporate office. He looked out of place here, as though his suit and tie didn't quite belong in such a casual setting. But it was him, John Grimes, and for a moment, Michelle felt the usual tension rise within her. She hadn't expected to see him here. Of all places, she hadn't expected him to follow her, let alone show up at the same coffee shop she frequented. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a little more defensive than she intended. John's lips twitched slightly. "I could ask you the same question. It's not like this is the kind of place you'd usually be seen in." Michelle's brow furrowed as she tried to process the unexpected encounter. "I come here sometimes. It's quiet. Helps me think." John nodded, his eyes scanning the coffee shop, taking in the simple, cozy atmosphere. For a moment, he looked out of place, a shark in a pond, but then his gaze landed back on her, and something shifted. Michelle looked away, trying to avoid the weight of his stare. "If you're here to make more threats, Mr. Grimes, I don't need it. I've heard enough." John's expression softened slightly, though he remained as stoic as ever. "I'm not here to make threats, Michelle. I'm just here." Michelle couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "Really? You just happen to be here?" He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I had a meeting nearby, and this place looked different." Michelle studied him for a moment. She wasn't sure why, but the way he said it felt different. It was strange to hear John Grimes, the man who had been nothing but cold and demanding, speak so casually. His presence still commanded attention, but there was something softer, something human in his tone. It was a fleeting moment, but Michelle caught it. She wasn't sure what to make of it. After everything that had happened, after all the battles they'd fought, it was hard to reconcile the man in front of her with the ruthless businessman she knew him to be. "Okay," Michelle said, deciding to break the silence. "What do you want?" John tilted his head slightly. "I just wanted to see you without all the business noise." The word struck Michelle, and for a moment, she felt herself falter. Was this really happening? John Grimes, the man who had built an empire on manipulation and fear, was standing in front of her, offering something close to normal conversation. "Why?" she asked, her voice skeptical but tinged with curiosity. "Because you're different," John said, almost as if the words surprised him. "I've been thinking a lot lately about our last conversation." Michelle felt her stomach tighten. She had never imagined this would be the result of their last encounter. She had assumed he'd return to his usual coldness, perhaps make another move to crush her spirit. But instead, something was changing. Something was shifting. John took a step closer to her table, but not in a threatening way. He wasn't towering over her the way he normally did. This time, it was almost like he was uncertain. "I've seen a lot of people come and go in my life," he said, his voice lower, "and I've built everything I have by cutting people off, by not letting anyone get too close. But there's something about you, Michelle, something that makes me question all of that." Michelle's mind raced as she listened. This was John Grimes, the man who had destroyed so many lives, and yet, here he was, showing a crack in his armor. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, unsure of what exactly she meant. "You don't have to be this person. You don't have to push everyone away. John's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Michelle saw something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. The walls he had so carefully built around himself seemed to be crumbling, and for a fleeting moment, she saw the real man beneath the cold exterior. "I don't know how to stop, Michelle," he admitted, almost reluctantly. "I don't know how to let anyone in." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Michelle's heart beat faster, and though she had every reason to remain guarded, she couldn't help but feel the shift in the room. John Grimes, the ruthless billionaire, had just revealed a side of himself she never thought she'd see. For a brief moment, it wasn't about business, money, or control. It was about two people who, in their own ways, were fighting to survive. "I'm not asking you to change overnight," Michelle said, her voice gentler now, "but maybe you should let go of some of that. You don't have to do it alone." John's eyes softened, and for the first time he didn't look like the unbreakable CEO he once was. For the first time he looked human. After their chance meeting in the coffee shop, Michelle couldn't shake the image of John's vulnerable side. It was a side of him she had never expected to see, and it made her question everything she thought she knew about him. The walls he had built around himself had started to crack, and Michelle couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the man than the ruthless CEO who had nearly destroyed her life. But the more she thought about it, the more frustrated she became. John had shown her a glimpse of humanity, yet his actions had remained the same. The pressure he placed on her continued to mount, and his cruelty toward her business, her team and her dreams had only intensified. Michelle had reached a breaking point. She couldn't let this man continue to control her fate without confronting him about the pain he had caused. It happened at one of the industry's biggest business events of the year. The venue was packed, with powerful figures in the business world, from investors to CEOs to entrepreneurs. Michelle had attended the event hoping to network, to find a way out of the suffocating grip John had on her company. But as soon as she walked in, her eyes landed on him, John Grimes, standing tall across the room, surrounded by a group of admirers and business associates. Her heart clenched. She had spent months trying to stay strong in his presence, enduring the stress of his relentless demands. But tonight, something inside her snapped. She had enough. Michelle walked across the room with determination, pushing through the crowd until she was standing right in front of him. She didn't care about the people watching, didn't care about the whispers that might follow. This was her moment, her chance to confront him face to face again, and finally speak her mind. John looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly at the unexpected confrontation. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but Michelle didn't back down. "Mr. Grimes," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "we need to talk." He regarded her for a moment, then nodded, signaling his associates to give them space. They all stepped back, sensing the tension between the two. For a brief moment, it was just the two of them in the middle of the crowded room, and Michelle could feel the weight of the moment pressed down on her. "Go ahead, Miss Foster," John said, his tone colder than ever. "What is it that you want to say?" Michelle stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come here with a purpose, and now she wasn't going to let fear stand in her way. "You don't even know me, John," she began, her words cutting through the silence between them. "You think power means taking everything from everyone, but it doesn't. You've built an empire, but you've lost your soul along the way." Her words hung in the air, and Michelle saw a softness in John's eyes, something that resembled confusion, maybe even shame. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially not in front of his peers. But Michelle didn't care about the people in the room. She didn't care about his empire or his wealth. She cared about standing up for herself, for her business, and for everything she had sacrificed. "You've made it your mission to destroy me, John," she continued, her voice growing stronger with every word. "You've used your money, your power, to make me suffer, And for what? To prove that you can control everything. You think you're invincible, but you're just a man hiding behind a wall of power, and I won't let you take everything from me. I won't let you break me. There was a tense silence. Michelle stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath, waiting for John to respond. She could feel the eyes of the room on them, but it didn't matter. She wasn't backing down. John's expression was unreadable, but for a brief moment, Michelle saw something shift behind his eyes. It wasn't the cold, calculating CEO she had come to know. It was a glimpse of vulnerability, something she hadn't expected to see. "I've worked my entire life to build this empire, Miss Foster," he said, his voice quieter than before, though still firm. "I don't have time for weakness. I don't have time for sentimentality. In this world, if you don't fight to protect what's yours, you lose it." Michelle shook her head, feeling a surge of anger rise within her. "I'm not asking for your pity, John. I'm not asking for a handout, but I'm done letting you treat me like I'm just another piece of property for you to control. I have a vision. I have a team, and I'm not giving up. I don't care how powerful you are." For a moment, John said nothing. The crowd around them had grown quieter, sensing the intensity of the confrontation. Michelle could see that John was considering her words. She could see the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes narrowed, as if he was struggling to reconcile the man he had become with the man standing in front of him. For a brief second, he looked unsure. "You're still fighting," he said quietly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "After everything, you're still fighting." Michelle didn't know what to say. The words felt like they had left her, but something in the way he spoke made her pause. It was as if he had never really considered what it meant to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward, even when the odds were stacked against you. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "Yes, John, I'm still fighting, and I'll keep fighting, no matter what." John didn't say anything else for a long moment. The tension between them was almost suffocating. Then finally he spoke, his voice softer than it had been in a long time. "You're more than I gave you credit for, Michelle," he said, almost as if admitting something to himself. Michelle didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it a compliment, a challenge, or was it just John Grimes, always pushing people, always testing them? "I don't expect you to understand, John," she replied, her voice steady. "But I'm not giving up, and I won't let you take my dream from me." For a moment, John just looked at her. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Michelle standing in the center of the room. But this time she wasn't alone. She had spoken her truth. For the first time, John had listened. The events of the business gathering lingered in Michelle's mind long after the confrontation. She had said her piece, and she had felt the shift between them, a shift that neither of them had expected. She could tell that John had been affected by her words, but she didn't know how far that would go. Despite all the animosity, she had left that room with a strange sense of satisfaction. She had fought for herself, for her dream. She had stood up to John, and for the first time she saw a glimpse of something else behind his cold exterior. Days passed, and Michelle threw herself back into her work. She tried to ignore the growing tension in her chest, the feeling that things between her and John were far from over, but she kept her head down, focusing on her business and trying to stay afloat, hoping that somehow she could find a way to turn things around. Then, one evening, as she was leaving the office, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from John Grimes. "Meet, there's something I need to talk to you about, alone." The message was brief, but it felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. Michelle stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. She had no intention of getting involved in anything with John beyond business, but there was a part of her, a part she couldn't deny, that wondered if this was the moment when things could finally change. After a few moments of hesitation, she typed out a response, "Where and when?" The reply came almost instantly, "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. The restaurant on 5th and Main." The next evening, Michelle stood outside the restaurant, her hands nervously clutching the strap of her purse. She wasn't sure what to expect. John had been a mystery to her ever since they'd first met, and now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure what his intentions were. She entered the restaurant, and the familiar weight of John's presence hit her before she even saw him. She found him sitting at a private corner table, his back straight and his posture commanding as always. But tonight, something felt different. He wasn't surrounded by business associates, no polished exterior of cold authority, just him, alone in the soft glow of candlelight. Michelle approached the table, taking a seat across from him. John looked up, his eyes meeting her. There was a quiet tension in the air, something unspoken but deeply felt. Neither of them spoke for a moment, as if waiting for the right words to come. Finally, John broke the silence. His voice was quieter than usual, the usual coldness replaced by something else, something that seemed almost vulnerable. "I wanted to talk to you, Michelle, away from everything, away from the business. I know I've pushed you too hard." Michelle listened carefully, her guard still up, but she couldn't deny that the change in John's demeanor intrigued her. She had never seen him like this, not in all the encounters they'd had. "I don't know why I've been so harsh with you," John continued, his eyes fixed on the table between them. "I've made your life harder than it needed to be. But I don't know how to stop. I've never known." Michelle leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" John's eyes rose to meet hers. For a brief moment, there was something in his gaze, something raw and unguarded. "There's a lot I've done. Things I regret," he said, his voice quieter now. "When I was younger, I trusted someone with everything I had. I loved her. I thought we were going to build something together. But she betrayed me. She took everything, my trust, my heart, and then she walked away with it all. I lost everything. The business, the woman, my faith in people." Michelle stayed silent, sensing that John wasn't finished. She hadn't expected him to open up to her like this, but there was something in his eyes now that she had never seen before. It wasn't just the cold CEO. It was a man who had been deeply hurt and who had built up walls to keep from feeling that kind of pain again. "Ever since then," John continued, his voice heavy with emotion, "I've kept everyone at arm's length. I pushed people away, employees, friends, even women. I thought that if I didn't let anyone in, I couldn't get hurt again. I couldn't be vulnerable. But then you came along. And I couldn't stop noticing you. You weren't like everyone else. And it scared me." Michelle sat back, processing his words. She had heard of his past, the rumors about his relationships, and the bitterness that had followed his first love. But hearing it from him, in his own words, made it real. She didn't know how to respond to the man sitting across from her, someone she had once seen only as a ruthless businessman, and now saw as a person, a man who had been broken and was struggling to rebuild. "I didn't want to let you in," John admitted, his voice low. "I pushed you away because I was afraid. I didn't want to feel that kind of pain again. But the truth is, I can't stop thinking about you, about what you said. You're right. I've lost my way. I've been so focused on power and control that I forgot what it meant to really live." Michelle's heart softened as she listened. She hadn't expected this confession. She had always known that John's cold exterior hid something deeper, but hearing him speak about his vulnerability, his fear, was unexpected. "You don't have to keep running from your past, John," Michelle said quietly, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to keep pushing people away. You've built an empire, but that doesn't mean you have to lose everything that really matters." A look of something unfamiliar crossed John's eyes, something that resembled hope. He looked at Michelle, and for the first time he didn't look like the man who had spent years building his empire with ruthlessness and control. He looked like a man who was finally willing to admit that he couldn't do it alone anymore. "I don't know if I can change, Michelle," he said, his voice a little rough. "But I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to live in fear of getting hurt again." Michelle reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. It was a simple gesture, but for John, it felt like a lifeline. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone with his pain. For the first time in a long time, someone saw him, not as a CEO, not as a businessman, but as a man who had been through a lot and was trying to find his way. "You don't have to change overnight," Michelle said, her voice soothing, "but you don't have to live in fear anymore, either." John nodded slowly, the walls he had built around himself beginning to crumble. The weight of his past, the fear, the betrayal, it was still there, but Michelle's words offered him something he hadn't felt in years, a way forward. The days that followed Michelle's confrontation with John were filled with a sense of quiet change. At first, Michelle couldn't be sure if she had made any real impact. She knew John's history, the coldness with which he had always treated others, and the way he had pushed people away for years. Could a single conversation truly change someone like him? Could he really become the person he claimed he wanted to be? But as the weeks passed, something began to shift, and it wasn't just Michelle who noticed. John, the ruthless billionaire CEO who had made a career out of controlling people and circumstances, seemed to be acting differently, more thoughtful, more approachable, and dare she say it, kinder. It started subtly. Michelle didn't see it at first, but little things began to change in the way John interacted with the world. He still ran his empire with precision, but his approach had softened. The cold, authoritative tone that had once defined him seemed to fade into something warmer. In meetings he would listen more, offer solutions with a calm demeanor, and on rare occasions, even ask how his employees were doing. But the most noticeable change came with Michelle's business. One evening, as Michelle was sifting through emails, a strange notification popped up on her screen. It was a payment confirmation. At first, she assumed it was from a client she had recently worked with. But when she opened the details, her eyes widened in surprise. The payment was substantial, far more than what she had anticipated, and there was no explanation for it. Confused, she reached out to her accountant, who confirmed that the payment had cleared, and that her accounts had been fully updated. It wasn't just one payment, either. Over the past few weeks, several of her overdue invoices had been mysteriously paid off, and her debts were being cleared without her involvement. Michelle's mind raced. Could this have been a mistake? Was someone trying to sabotage her business? But the more she looked into it, the more she realized there was no way around it. Someone had paid off her debts, cleared her accounts, and ensured that her business would continue to function without the constant pressure of mounting financial stress. It didn't take long for Michelle to put the pieces together. The only person with the power, the resources, and the interest in saving her business was John Grimes. But why was he doing this? Why was he helping her without telling her? Michelle was hesitant to believe it at first. After all, this was John Grimes, the man who had nearly destroyed her career, the man who had pushed her to the brink of bankruptcy. But as she thought about their conversation at the restaurant, a small hope began to stir inside her. Could it be that John was actually changing? Could he really be trying to make things right? Despite the overwhelming evidence that John was behind the unexpected help, Michelle remained cautious. She couldn't forget the ruthless businessman who had nearly ruined her, and she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this could be some sort of manipulation, an attempt to control her under the guise of kindness. Still, there were moments when Michelle noticed John's behavior in the office, outside of their business dealings, that made her wonder. At one of her agency's meetings, John had walked in to discuss an upcoming project. Instead of the usual cold, aloof demeanor, he had been engaged, asking insightful questions and offering constructive feedback to her team. He even complimented the work they had done, something he would have never done before. Michelle had watched him carefully that day, unsure of how to process the change. Was it possible that John Grimes, the man who had lived and breathed business power, was actually starting to care about more than just the bottom line? One day, John called Michelle into his office for a one-on-one meeting. As she entered, she couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous anticipation. The man who had once made her feel like an insignificant pawn in his business game was now offering her something else, an opportunity. But what did it really mean? Michelle, John began, looking up from his desk. I wanted to check in with you. How's your business doing? She looked at him, a little taken aback. Was he really asking about her business? Had he finally softened? Or was this just another power play? It's going well, she said carefully. Thanks to the payments I've been receiving. John raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. I'm glad to hear that. It's important that you have the chance to build on your vision. I don't want to stand in the way of. Michelle studied him, trying to discern the sincerity in his words. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was playing a game, but just as she was about to respond, he added something that stopped her in her track. I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night. John continued, his tone softer than usual, about my empire, about what I've lost along the way. Michelle froze. She hadn't expected him to bring that conversation up again. It had felt so raw, so vulnerable, and she had assumed he would just move on from it, like he did with everything else. I know I've made mistakes, John admitted, his voice quieter. I pushed people away for so long. I didn't realize how much I was losing in the process. I was too focused on building something that would protect me. But it's become clear to me now that all that power, all that control, it doesn't mean anything if you don't have anyone to share it with. Michelle felt a lump form in her throat. John Grimes was opening up to her, really opening up, and it wasn't just about business. It was about his life, his fears, his regrets. I've been trying to make things right, John continued, and I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I don't expect you to trust me, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Michelle sat there in stunned silence. John Grimes, the man who had terrorized her with his cold indifference, was finally showing signs of vulnerability. She could see it now. The cracks in his armor, the uncertainty beneath the arrogance. And for the first time, Michelle didn't feel like she was facing the enemy. She was facing a man who had been hurt, a man who had built walls to protect himself from the pain, only to find that those walls had isolated him. I don't know if I can trust you completely, John, Michelle said softly, her voice trembling slightly. But I want to believe you. I really do. John nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. I understand. I don't expect you to forget what I've done, Michelle. I've hurt people. I've been ruthless. But I don't want to be that man anymore. Michelle took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words settle inside her. She didn't know if this new John was real, or if he was just trying to tail the game differently. But for the first time, she felt hopeful that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. Michelle had thought about it for days. The conversation with John, his confession of vulnerability, his admission that he was trying to change. She wasn't naive. She understood how easily power could manipulate people, how those who had everything could play the game in their favor. But for the first time in a long while, she felt the pull of something more real, something genuine. But despite the moments of connection, doubts lingered in Michelle's mind. Was John truly changing? Was it all part of his usual tactics? Or was this new side of him something real? It was hard to shake the past, the cold, ruthless businessman who had caused her so much pain. But it was also hard to ignore the softer side of him she had started to see. The moments of kindness, the vulnerability that slipped through the cracks in his tough exterior. John's transformation hadn't been instant, and Michelle had watched it unfold, cautious but intrigued. He had slowly begun to prove himself, working behind the scenes to help her business, clearing debts, arranging contracts, ensuring she had the resources she needed to succeed. He had even started showing kindness to his employees, asking how they were, encouraging their growth instead of simply demanding results. He was softer, more human, and for the first time in a long time, Michelle saw that he was trying to right the wrongs of his past. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized that the man who had once been a symbol of everything cold and calculating was now someone who could offer warmth. The man who had built an empire through manipulation was now trying to build a future with honesty. But there was one thing Michelle had yet to say to him, the thing that had been growing in her heart, the thing that needed to be said for them to truly move forward. It happened one evening, after a long day at the office. Michelle had been working late on a new campaign, when she received a message from John, asking if they could meet. She was surprised. It had been a while since their last private conversation, and she wasn't sure what to expect, but she agreed, and met him at a quiet cafe, where the mood was intimate and relaxed. As she sat across from him, she noticed how much more at ease he seemed. Gone were the hard lines of stress and ruthlessness. In their place was a calm, grounded man. The man before her was the same John Grimes in some ways, the powerful businessman, the one who still held the reins of his empire, but there was something different now. He wasn't just a man of business, he was a man who was beginning to understand what it meant to be human. John met her gaze, and smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. "Michelle," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what we've both been through, what we've said to each other, and I've realized something." Michelle took a deep breath, knowing this moment was coming. This was the turning point, where things would either go forward or end for good. "What have you realized?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. John hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, his voice filled with sincerity. "I've realized that for so long, I pushed people away. I built walls around myself to avoid getting hurt. But what I didn't realize was that in doing so, I was losing out on everything that really mattered. What matters now, more than anything else, is being honest about who I am and about what I feel." Michelle's pulse quickened, and she held his gaze, knowing this was the moment that would define their future. She hadn't expected to hear him speak like this, not after everything, not after the way he had treated her in the past. But somehow, his words resonated with her. "I've fallen for you, Michelle," he continued, his voice softer now, "and for the first time, I feel like I'm not just trying to control everything. I'm ready to let go of that control, to trust, and to build something real with you." Michelle felt her heart race. This wasn't the John she had known, the ruthless CEO, the man who demanded obedience and crushed anyone who got in his way. This was a different John, and for the first time she felt a crack in her own walls. "I don't know if I can completely trust you yet," Michelle said, her voice low but honest. "But I've seen the man you're becoming, and I think we can move forward, together." John reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness overnight, Michelle, but I want to show you that I can be better, that I can be the man you deserve." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their past, the pain, the betrayal, the hurt, was still there, but in that silence, something else began to take its place: hope. Over the next few months, Michelle and John worked together to rebuild what had been broken. John kept his word. He continued to support Michelle's business, but now, it was different. There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda. He helped her in ways that were unexpected. He provided resources, helped her sign new contracts, and offered strategic advice, but he did so with an openness that he had never shown before. As Michelle's business began to thrive, so did their relationship. They spent more time together, not just as business partners, but as two people trying to build something new, something real. Their connection grew deeper, and with each passing day, Michelle began to see more of the man John was becoming, not just the businessman but the man who was willing to change. One evening, after a successful launch for one of Michelle's biggest clients, John surprised her. He pulled her aside, away from the crowd of well-wishers and clients, and took her hands in his. "Michelle," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "I've realized something. I don't just want to build this company with you. I want to build my life with you. Will you be my partner, not just in business, but in everything?" Michelle's heart swelled with warmth, the question hanging in the air between them. She had seen John transform before her eyes, and now, here he was, asking her to join him in creating a life together. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Yes, I will." And just like that, Michelle's strength broke through the ice-cold walls of a man who never thought he could love again. A ruthless billionaire, once lost in his empire, found something real, something worth fighting for. If you've been here till the end, I want to personally thank you for sticking with us on this incredible journey. Your support means the world, and I hope this story gave you something to think about. Love, power, and vulnerability are often more connected than we realize. But I want to hear from you. Did you think John would ever change? What about Michelle? How did she inspire you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I know this is a conversation worth having. If you're craving more stories like this, make sure to hit that like button and share the video with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, Bent Souls. This isn't the last story. Stay tuned for more incredible tales, and I'll see you in the next one.